Ariel, let's be blunt. You are, without a doubt, the most technically gifted analyst this firm has seen in a decade. Your models are immaculate. Your data retention is terrifying. But you lack one crucial thing: leadership material. Victor Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial and the man who had shaped my professional existence for 9 years, leaned back in his Italian leather chair, the leather squeaking in protest beneath his tailored weight. The hook was delivered not with malice, but with a practiced, regretful air of finality, which somehow made the insult far more devastating. It was my annual performance review, and the verdict was, yet again, pre-written. My name is Amelia Vance. I am 34 years old, and my world was built on meticulous calculation and irrefutable proof. I possessed a mind that could dissect the most complex derivatives markets and predict consumer shifts with eerie accuracy. My work was the engine of Sterling Financial's success, generating 40% of its high-margin revenue through proprietary algorithmic trading systems. Yet to Victor, I was merely the engine, never the driver. The context and character intro was rooted in the classic corporate contrast. Victor Sterling, 55, was pure charisma, a symphony of loud ties, booming laughter, and effortless networking. He was the visible brand, the visionary who could charm institutional investors into signing multi-million-dollar deals based purely on his confidence. I, conversely, was meticulously quiet, precise, and entirely focused on the operational reality. I was the one who ensured the promises Victor made were financially viable, but my quiet efficiency was constantly mistaken for a lack of emotional intelligence. The background conflict had festered over 9 years of professional stasis. I had watched as promotion after promotion, roles involving client interface, team management, or strategic direction, went to others who were loud, charming, and utterly reliant on my data. The worst slight occurred 3 years prior when the director of strategy role went to Mark Jensen, a man who consistently submitted error-ridden reports, but possessed an astonishing ability to make small talk during elevator rides. When I confronted Victor, he gave me the speech that became the anchor of my internal rage. "Amelia, you are too good with data, and frankly, too poor with people to lead," he had said then. "You intimidate them. Leadership isn't just about being right. It's about making people feel good about being led. You don't have that spark. You don't have it." Now, leaning back in his chair in the sterile, high-floor office overlooking Chicago's financial district, he delivered the updated version. "I'm moving Mark up to Senior Vice President of Client Relations," Victor continued, oblivious to the controlled fire in my gaze. "He has the rapport. He understands the optics. You, Amelia, will remain head of quantitative analysis. I need your precision. I need your models, but I need you to stay in the engine room. You are too valuable here to be exposed to the social fray. My current models predict a 20% decline in Q3 profitability if we fail to secure the Apex Labs integration," I stated, shifting the focus abruptly from my personality flaws to his operational failures. "Mark doesn't even know how to run the sensitivity analysis on that deal." Victor waved a dismissive hand, reaching for the bottle of imported water on his desk. "Details, Amelia. I'll handle Mark. I'll handle the Apex Labs deal. That's my job. Your job is to generate the analysis. My job is to sell the vision. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a new SVP to congratulate." I stood, accepting the dismissal not as defeat, but as confirmation. The humiliation was not just personal. It was professional. He saw me as a complex machine to be used, never as a strategic mind to be leveraged. I walked out of that office, the sound of Victor's booming laughter echoing down the hall as he called Mark in for the promotion announcement, and decided the narrative was about to change. The discovery and the secret audit. I threw myself back into my work, fueled by a decade of repressed anger. Victor needed my analysis for the Apex Labs integration, a deal that would see Sterling Financial acquire a small, highly specialized biotech firm. Victor had sold this deal to the board as the firm's entry into the cutting-edge R&D market. I was supposed to be running the final due diligence for the board presentation, the task that Victor had so carelessly dismissed as details. My precision was not just an asset. It was a curse. As I meticulously dissected Apex Labs' financials, a chilling reality began to surface. The numbers didn't align. The valuation that Victor had assured the board was based on Apex Labs' future patents was drastically inflated. The core of Apex Labs' value, a flagship patent listed as Asset X, was entirely reliant on secondary investment from a single, shadowy holding corporation, Chimera Group. I immediately flagged the dependency to Victor's office, using neutral, corporate language. His response was a dismissive, pre-written email. Noted, legal has reviewed. Proceed with integration projection based on full valuation. This is a board-level directive. Victor's cavalier attitude was the first real crack in his facade of competence. He hadn't reviewed the dependency. He had ignored it. Apex Labs was a fragile, financially dependent entity, and its sole purpose in Victor's scheme was to provide an enormous, immediate revenue boost based on its patent claims. A boost Victor needed to cover a gaping hole in Sterling Financial's balance sheet. I stopped running the due diligence and started running a forensic audit. Working late, using my access to the firm's legacy accounting systems, I began tracing the flow of capital. The discovery was slow, meticulous, and horrifying. Sterling Financial was bleeding cash, not from bad investments but from systemic fraud. For the past 4 years, Victor had been masking massive quarterly losses in the firm's core bond portfolio by creating synthetic assets, ghost investments that appeared valuable on paper but were entirely fictional. The losses were astronomical, exceeding the firm's liquid reserves by tens of millions. Victor needed the Apex Labs acquisition to succeed, not for market penetration, but to use the inflated valuation as collateral against a desperate short-term loan. He was kicking the can down the road, and the road was about to end in a criminal indictment. The most damning piece of the puzzle, the true nexus of the rot, was the mysterious investor. Chimera Group. I spent 6 weeks of nights and weekends tracing the holding company's ownership through complex international trusts. My algorithm, usually focused on predicting market shifts, was now focused on predicting corporate lies. The conclusion was undeniable and delivered a gut punch of personal betrayal. Chimera Group was a wholly owned shell company of Victor Sterling himself. He wasn't just hiding losses. He was actively engineering a massive, fraudulent acquisition, intending to leverage the firm's legitimate assets to bail himself out, likely destroying Sterling Financial in the process and leaving thousands of employees, including me, jobless and holding the bag for his crimes. The internal fury I had harbored over my lack of promotion instantly transformed into a cold, terrifying clarity of purpose. This wasn't about professional jealousy anymore. This was about justice, professional integrity, and self-preservation. Victor had used my meticulous work as a smokescreen for his fraud. I continued my professional duties flawlessly, generating the necessary, positive integration projections based on the full, fraudulent valuation Victor demanded. I became his most effective, trusted accomplice, all while secretly documenting every email, every transfer, and every conversation that proved his criminal intent. My emotional reserve, which he had called a lack of people skills, was now my greatest weapon. I realized I couldn't just expose him. If I blew the whistle prematurely, the scandal would destroy the firm's market value, rendering my years of hard work worthless. I needed to let Victor walk right into the trap I was setting. I needed to execute the ultimate hostile takeover, not of a competitor, but of the very firm that had dismissed me. The final insult at the investor retreat. The current event trigger was the annual Sterling Financial Investor Retreat, held at a luxurious, secluded resort in Aspen. This event was Victor's personal theater, where he dazzled the firm's high-net-worth clients and board members. This year, the entire focus was on the Apex Labs deal. I attended as the lead analyst, required to present the final, detailed projections supporting the acquisition's feasibility. This was also where Victor planned to announce the final major executive changes. The resort ballroom was opulent, filled with the self-satisfied murmurs of financial elite. I stood quietly near the back, my presentation loaded onto the massive screen, waiting my turn. Victor took the stage, embodying his signature charisma. He spoke of vision, synergy, and unprecedented growth. He then moved to the promotions, the moment I had waited for. The final, ultimate personal humiliation designed to cement my status as the perpetual second in command. And now, Victor boomed, turning to the front row, I want to recognize the true driving force behind our client relations and our future strategic direction. Mark Jensen. As of today, Mark is officially promoted to Chief Client Officer and will take a seat on the executive board. The applause was loud and genuine. Mark, red-faced and beaming, took the stage and offered a rambling, self-congratulatory speech thanking Victor for his faith and promising even bigger wins. Then Victor turned back to the podium, his voice dropping slightly, the condescension palpable. And of course, we must thank our incredible head of quantitative analysis, Amelia Vance, Victor continued, pointing toward me, inviting the audience to search me out. Amelia's models are the technical foundation for everything we do. Without her numbers, Mark wouldn't have a vision to sell. Amelia, stand up, take a bow. We appreciate you staying in the engine room, ensuring the engine runs smoothly. The entire room turned, locating me in the shadows. The applause was thin, perfunctory, and died quickly. Victor had intentionally reduced me to a high-functioning piece of software, valued only for output, lacking the necessary human interface to be truly important. Mark took the microphone back. Thanks again to Amelia for the hard numbers. I look forward to working with her and directing her considerable talents from the executive board. I felt a surge of cold triumph. This final insult, delivered in front of the board and the major investors, was precisely the moral fuel I needed. The humiliation was complete. My turn came 15 minutes later. I took the stage, adjusting the microphone to my height, my demeanor calm, precise, and utterly devoid of the emotional chaos that roiled beneath my surface. I spent 20 minutes delivering the flawless, detailed projection on the Apex Labs acquisition, presenting the data points Victor had demanded, the fraudulent ones. I sold the lie better than Victor ever could, because I understood the numbers perfectly. As I finished, Victor smiled, raising his hand to silence the polite applause. Excellent work, Amelia. See, numbers are her game. Now, any questions for Amelia before we close the session and move to the celebratory reception? A hand shot up from the middle of the room. Mr. Hawthorne, a major institutional investor and a critical member of the board. Amelia, Mr. Hawthorne asked, his voice serious. Your projections are stellar, but you noted in the preliminary filing that the core patent, Asset X, is dependent on secondary investment from a single source, Chimera Group. Can you briefly address the risk of concentrating that valuation reliance on one external party? Victor, standing beside me, tensed. He had been hoping no one would ask about Chimera. A valid question, Mr. Hawthorne, I replied, meeting his gaze, and one I would be happy to answer now, as it forms the basis of my final unscheduled presentation. I reached over and discreetly pressed a key on the presentation keyboard. The flawless slide detailing the Apex Labs patent instantly vanished, replaced by a single, stark image, a detailed organizational chart titled, The True Cost of Apex, the Chimera Fraud. The Execution and the Turning of Tables. The presentation slide was a visual explosion of undeniable truth. It meticulously detailed the shell company structure of Chimera Group, with arrows leading directly to Victor Sterling's personal offshore accounts. Beneath that, in bold red text, was the summary of the core fraud. Creation of synthetic assets to mask 45 annailers in core bond losses, 2020-2023. The room descended into a stunned silence that felt heavier than any noise. Victor's face, moments ago flushed with self-satisfaction, was now a terrifying shade of purple. What is the meaning of this, Amelia? Victor hissed, his voice trembling with fury, desperately trying to yank the power cord from the projector. I calmly stepped between him and the equipment. The meaning, Victor, is that the Apex Labs deal is not a strategic acquisition. It is a criminal financial maneuver designed to use an inflated asset to hide your extensive, systematic fraud. And I have the proof. I turned, addressing the stunned investors and the entire executive board. Ladies and gentlemen, my meticulous nature, which Victor dismissed as lacking leadership material, is precisely what enabled me to conduct a full, independent forensic audit over the last 6 months. Victor Sterling has been systematically deceiving this board and misrepresenting the firm's viability for 4 years. The Apex Labs acquisition was merely his last, desperate attempt to cover his tracks before a mandated external audit. Mr. Hawthorne, the institutional investor, rose, his face pale with rage. This is libel, Sterling. You defrauded us? Is this true? Victor abandoned all pretense of corporate polish. It's a lie. She's retaliating! She's jealous because I wouldn't promote her. She's unstable. Unstable? I countered, my voice rising, cutting through his panicked shouts. I have the wire transfer logs. proving the direct correlation between Victor's personal funds and the creation of Chimera Group. I have recorded communications where Victor directed the head of accounting to mask the bond losses, and as of 10 a.m. this morning, I secured the final component of this operation. I walked to the podium and retrieved a large, stamped folder that had been discreetly placed there by my previously unseen accomplice. For the last year, I have liquidated every asset I own, secured external, non-dilutive financing from a consortium of private equity partners who value integrity, and executed a quiet, leveraged acquisition of 42% of Sterling Financial's outstanding preferred stock. I paused, allowing the gravity of the financial maneuver to register on their horrified faces. Victor, your own fraudulent activities, which inflated the perceived risk of the company, allowed me to acquire this substantial block of stock at a discounted rate. Combined with the 9% institutional stock I purchased discreetly from a retiring board member last month, I now control 51% of the voting shares of Sterling Financial. I looked directly at Victor Sterling, CEO of the company, who was now being surrounded by concerned board members. Effective immediately, Victor. Your motion to promote Mark Jensen is dead. Your acquisition of Apex Labs is terminated. And as the majority voting shareholder, and the only person in this room with clean hands and a command of the firm's operational reality, I deliver the final verdict. I opened the folder. Victor Sterling, you are hereby relieved of all duties, titles, and fiduciary responsibilities to Sterling Financial. Your tenure as CEO ends now. I have bought your company, and the engine room is now in charge of the entire vessel. Victor let out a sound that was a sickening mix of rage, denial, and physical collapse. He tried to speak, pointing a shaking finger at me. You were never leadership material. You lack it. I lacked the capacity for fraud, Victor, I concluded, and I lacked the willingness to sacrifice competence for charisma. I had it all along, the ability to assess value and execute strategy. You were just too arrogant to see it. The board chairman, Mr. Harrison, a frail man who looked terrified of the criminal and civil liability now swirling around them, immediately turned to me. Ms. Vance, Amelia, what are your demands? What is your plan? I took the microphone back. My plan is simple: clean house, restore integrity, and ensure that the people who build this company are the ones who lead it. The meeting is adjourned. The new era begins now. The long aftermath. The CEO and the janitor. The immediate aftermath was pure, unadulterated executive chaos. The SEC was notified, and they descended upon the firm, led by the evidence I had meticulously provided. Victor Sterling was arrested 3 weeks later, charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit market manipulation. The criminal investigation was relentless, fueled by my comprehensive documentation. Victor Sterling's consequence: the complete collapse. Victor fought the takeover and the criminal charges with every penny he had, but my planning was absolute. The Chimera fraud was undeniable. His assets were frozen. His charisma, once his greatest asset, became useless in a courtroom dealing with hard numbers. He lost the firm, his reputation, and eventually his freedom. He was sentenced to a lengthy term in federal prison. His final humiliation came during the civil suit filed by the firm, now under my control, to recover stolen assets. His personal wealth, the source of his arrogance, was entirely liquidated. He was left with nothing but his shame. The professional rebirth, Amelia's reign. I took the reins as CEO, leading a brutal, necessary process of corporate detoxification. I didn't rely on inherited goodwill. I relied on data and absolute transparency. I fired Mark Jensen and every other incompetent executive Victor had promoted, replacing them with the meticulous, overlooked analysts and managers who understood competence over charm. Sterling Financial, renamed Ethermetrics, was successfully stabilized. My systems, once the engine, were now the core methodology of the entire organization. The firm's culture shifted from high-pressure sales and visible ego to quiet competence and empirical results. 5 years later, Ethermetrics was a financial titan, renowned for its ethical rigor and phenomenal success. I, Amelia Vance, was hailed in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal as the anti-CEO, the leader who valued precision over performance. The final, personal humiliation. The closure, however, required one final perfect meeting with Victor. 5 years after the takeover, Victor Sterling had served his time and was released on parole. I received an internal report from my facilities management division regarding a mandatory application for a new maintenance contract. The name listed on the application's contact form was Victor Sterling. He was applying for a low-level, outsourced maintenance position with a janitorial services company that serviced Ethermetrics headquarters. I requested a personal interview, held not in my towering CEO suite, but in a small, windowless supply room in the building's basement, the true engine room of the firm. Victor walked in, looking a decade older, wearing cheap, ill-fitting clothes. He was pale, defeated, utterly stripped of his former swagger. He didn't recognize the room, nor did he recognize the powerful woman who stood before him. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice quiet, professional. "Thank you for coming. I am Amelia Vance, CEO of Ethermetrics. I requested this final check on your application." Victor flinched, the sound of his former title, CEO, delivered by my voice, hitting him like a physical blow. He looked around the cramped room, then back at me. "Ariel," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I wasn't trying to get close to the data. I just need an honest job. I need to fulfill my parole requirements." "I know, Victor," I said, "and I have the power to approve or deny this contract, which is your only route back into gainful employment." I walked over to the supply shelf, picked up a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner, and turned back to him. "I have 2 questions for you, Victor. The first is professional. Do you finally understand that competence, rigor, and meticulousness are the actual foundations of leadership?" He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand. I was wrong. Your talent was wasted on my arrogance." "The second question is personal," I continued, setting the cleaner down. 9 years ago, you told me I'd never be leadership material because I lacked it. The charisma, the spark. Standing here now, Victor, having acquired your company, dismantled your fraud, and built a successful ethical empire from the ashes of your failure. Do you still believe I lack it? Victor looked at the woman who had defeated him, whose quiet discipline had exposed his glamorous lies. He looked at the windowless room, the place where the real work happened. "No, Amelia," he admitted, the sound wrung from his soul. "You didn't lack it. You lacked the tolerance for my incompetence. You were the only leader in the room all along." I nodded, the final emotional debt settled. "Your application is approved, Victor. You start Monday. I expect the floors to gleam." I turned and walked out, leaving the former CEO of Sterling Financial standing in the basement supply room. I didn't look back. The revenge was complete. I had not only bought his company, but I had bought the final, permanent acknowledgement of my own unassailable worth. The engineer had finally become the captain, and the false captain was cleaning the deck.